I'm honored to welcome back Dr. Tim Wadkins. Tim, it's been almost 4 years since you were here and talked about your book, The Rise of Pentecostalism in Modern El Salvador, and about the two mega congregations and the many smaller congregations. But now the effort growing out of that has increased exponentially. I mean, you're now talking about 10 different countries in the Global South, and I think 50 different congregations. Wow, how did you expand this project to such an extent?
So my book was published in 2017, and I contacted the John Templeton Foundation in Philadelphia shortly after that, because I knew one of their vice presidents had done some work on megachurches, and because of the study in El Salvador, I'd been interested in megachurches in other parts of the world. And I was originally looking for some funding, maybe to do some research on one of the bigger churches, and he suggested to me, why not expand it? Get some research teams and build a major project on this phenomena of huge churches in the Global South. And so that's what I did. We wrote a proposal. The proposal was accepted, and we were given generous funding by the Templeton to organize a 10-country, 17-church study using many, many different research teams.
Well, we have a great 3-minute plus video produced by Tyler Kaufman, who's one of your staff persons, that introduces the project. Let's take a look at it now.
Okay. Contrary to what some scholars were saying, that eventually Christianity would just wear away and go away, it actually hasn't. In fact, it has been exploding in what we call the Global South. South Asia, East Asia, Latin America, and Africa. Over the last half century, Christianity has been moving into these areas in dramatic ways. While Christianity is declining in the United States and other areas of the North Atlantic, it is growing very, very rapidly in what we call the Global South. And a big part, really a huge part of this global Christianity is the rise and proliferation of megachurches. There are 50 congregations throughout the Global South that have more than 15,000 people, and there are about 5 or 6 that have over 500,000 people. This project really boils down to 3 questions. Why are these churches so big, and how did they get that big over a very short period of time? Most of these megachurches only started in the 1970s or 1980s. We want to know what differentiates these churches from one another. How do they differ in terms of the congregants that come to these churches? Are they middle class, upper class, lower class? How do they differ theologically? Are they what we would call evangelical? Are they Pentecostal? How do these churches fit into the world that they exist in? How are these churches being shaped by their urban environments? How are these churches in turn shaping their urban environments? We have scholars that are working from the Philippines, from Indonesia, from Nigeria, from Kenya, from India. The literature on megachurches, it's mostly done simply from the standpoint of looking at websites or maybe attending a service or two of a megachurch, and then there's a lot of theory about this. But it strikes me that this is going to go very, very deep and empirically tell the world just what's going on in these megachurches.
We probably need about 400 surveys per church. That will give us enough information to be able to understand each church, and then when we put that all together, we'll have a huge sample of congregants to be able to analyze. But we're hoping to do, as I say, about 400 surveys per church.
So am I right to think that if we have 20 churches, that's going to be about 8,000 surveys that we'll be giving out? That's a lot of data.
That's a lot of data. That's a lot of data.
Tim, that's a pretty impressive video and a sort of impressive project. It's just amazing. Trying to look at how you've gone from one country to 10. I mean, initially you talked about flying back and forth between El Salvador numerous times, but you can't do that with 10 different countries.
We can try. So the way this project is organized is we have 7 research teams led by very, very established social scientists in each place. And there are 10 different countries represented. Let me see if I can remember all of them. India, Kenya, Nigeria, Ghana, El Salvador, Guatemala, Brazil, South Korea, the Philippines, and Indonesia. I think that adds up to 10. And there are usually 2 or 3 churches in each place. And we've divided the project into regions. So there are 7 regional teams, and we're doing research in 17 to 20 churches. And as the director of the whole project, I am trying to get to each research site to visit. And we have been imperiled by COVID just like everybody else, and churches were closed for nearly 2 years. We were on travel bans, so we couldn't fly internationally, and it's only been in the last 6 months that myself and the assistant director of the project are able to travel to some of those research sites.
Well, this was a real struggle not only for you, but in many of those countries, COVID hit very hard in the churches.
It did. COVID hit very hard after it hit in the West primarily, but it became a huge issue. And even now, some of these bigger churches are still not open. Others have capacity restrictions, so they're not opening up to full congregations. And this is a real blow. Not only has there been, immense suffering and death in these congregations, but these are very, very, very large churches. Some of these churches have 300, 400,000 people. They have huge budgets. They have huge media departments. And with no people going to church, you get fewer contributions. And so funding is down, and they're hurting financially because of that. So the mega churches of pre-COVID might not quite be the same phenomena as the mega churches of post-COVID. And we're still waiting to find out how that turns out.
Well, we're hearing similar things from some congregations here that based upon their membership coming, and these are views that more folks with lower levels of income. Do these folks in the churches, do they manage being able to stream the program, and can people watch?
Yeah, and this is where mega churches in particular have an advantage over smaller churches, and I think it's becoming an interesting dynamic, because in many of the smaller congregations of the Global South, they may not have internet, they may not have even electricity in some cases, but these big mega churches have the finances and the apparatus, the media technology to develop big technological virtual programs. And so there is a phenomena taking place where people are beginning to tune in to church in the bigger churches and not going back to their smaller churches.
Recently, you were in Nigeria. True. And what you've told me about it is just sort of amazing. What's going on there, the size of this effort, and so forth. It's just a phenomena that I don't have anything to measure it by.
It's hard to get your head around it. There is a church, well, first of all, right outside of Lagos, there's an expressway called the Ibadan Expressway, and there are probably 6 megachurches along that expressway, and they all have congregations bigger than 300,000. So just, this has got to be the most God-ridden expressway in the world. And one church in particular, and we spent a week in this congregation and with these people, is called the Redeemed Christian Church of God, and it's just outside of Lagos. And it is hard to know just how many people attend this church, because it's organized according to parishes. It's very similar to the Catholic Church in a way. There are all these Redeemed Christian Churches of God all over the world, but they have one main center, which is called Redemption Camp outside of Lagos. And they have recently constructed a building, and most people go, no, this couldn't be, but it is true, I've been there. This building will hold 3 million people. And every month they have their Holy Ghost conventions, and they pretty much fill it. And it is, when you're standing on the stage, you cannot see from one end to the other, from one side to the other. It is the biggest single covered space I've ever been in my life. And so this church is undoubtedly, if you measure it, according to all of its parishes and the capacity of this pavilion, I think this church will easily be the largest church in the world.
Well, I can't imagine getting that many people in and out. I mean, we talk about kind of football stadiums and the long time delays, but you're talking about 1 million people plus.
Oh, yeah, it's a nightmare, but there are parking lots all over the place. There are buses that go up to the hill where this pavilion is located. There are probably 400 bathrooms around the facilities. They have a choir in these Holy Ghost services that has 5,000 people. It is just the biggest spectacle you could ever witness.
Well, I want to ask you, what's the difference between the Global South churches that you're visiting and studying and what's happening in the U.S. and Europe with the decline?
Yeah, so most people know that churches in Europe and the United States are in decline. We see church buildings all over Buffalo, for example, that have become condominium complexes. In the Global South, it is exactly the opposite. Christianity is just simply growing in the Global South because of fertility rates. But there is this massive revival of spirit-filled Christianity taking place. And it is similar to what we might call the Second Great Awakening that occurred in the United States and Britain in around 19th century.
That's helpful.
And if you recall, during those early times in the United States, it was a time when modernization began to take place. And the same thing is happening in the Global South. These urban centers are modernizing, and along with it, you get these new ideas about Christian faith. And I think it is spawning a lot of growth.
Now, we just have a few seconds left, but is this basically, as we had in Salvador, the churches of the poor, or is it really crossing all class lines?
It runs the gamut of classes. There's a church in the Philippines that is filled with just very, very, very wealthy people, and it's a church of 40,000. One of the poorest churches in the world is the church I worked in El Salvador, with very poor working people, and it's a church of 100,000. And so it really does cross the class spectrum.
Tim Wadkins, thank you so much for joining us and just talking about how your smaller project in El Salvador has expanded to looking at the global churches in the South and how much we might learn from them. Thank you, Tim.
Good to be here. Thanks for having me.